Hey, everybody out there in the non-gynocentric world. This is Paul Elam with A Voice for Men, and I'm speaking with Peter Wright of gynocentrism.com. Peter, how you doing today?
I'm doing good, Paul, and good to be talking with you again.
Same here. Been looking forward to this talk. These talks, by the way, for everyone to know, are a series of talks that Peter and I will be doing mainly on the topic of gynocentrism, on romantic chivalry, on our history, philosophy, and hopefully tying that stuff into current events for you, which we're going to do today. But these are available for the first 30 days are going to be available to Patreon subscribers only at the An Ear for Men channel. There's no minimum on that. If you want to donate $1 per video that I do on An Ear for Men and then cap yourself off at $1, you still get all of these podcasts. So any contribution at all will qualify you for that. And with that, we're going to go ahead and proceed on and talk about this recent kerfuffle that there's been throughout the MGTOW community and into some of this community about the video by PragerU that featured Brad Wilcox talking for about 6.5 minutes on why it was so important and to the benefit of young men that they run out and get themselves a wife and start working more hours. No, folks, I didn't make this up. It's actually what he was selling. And I guess I want to start, Peter, just if you could maybe give everybody your overall impressions of the video, which we'll link in the low bar, by the way.
I think my main impression of it was you can hear the anxiety in his pitch. A real fear of men not being married, and we can take that apart, but
well, why don't we take that apart a little bit? Can you expand on that somewhat, of what you mean by his fear of men not getting married?
Well, he clearly disparages men who are not married,
Yep.
And behind that disparagement, I smell fear. Maybe it sort of shatters his worldview to learn that a lot of men are going MGTOW, and he wants to reinstate that nice white picket fence with the married couple behind it and make himself feel all warm and cozy. That's what I'm assuming.
Yeah, because you can almost bet that given the fact that young men are largely opting not to get married, they're avoiding that institution like the plague, that this guy lives in a culture where he may see himself becoming a dinosaur. And that's, of course, not only reflection on the things that he believes in, but on how he conducts his whole life.
Right. And it also has a heroic edge too. You wonder if in his imagination, he's talking to women when he's making these videos, positioning himself as the hero for women and marriage, a white knight.
Yeah, that's come up a lot. A lot of people I've noticed in the speculation. I did a video on this. As the last one you'll find at An Ear for Men channel was on this on Brad Wilcox, the presenter in that PragerU video, and what he had to say. And I noticed a lot of speculation in the comments of people wondering, who's his real audience? What are they intending? Who are they trying to reach? Are they trying to reach white knights? Are they trying to reach employers? Are they trying to reach women? Or are they just, pretty much doing a circle jerk for their brethren in that highly religious culture, pro-marriage culture? And I think I agree with you, Peter. I landed on the side of same old in the white knight industry. They're trying to appeal to the better sensibilities and pleasure of women.
Right. Yeah. That's well, the line. One of the lines that he put out was that, I don't know if he actually used the term, but that men are suffering from a sort of Peter Pan condition. Did he actually use that term? Do you know? I think he did.
I think I saw that in a comment, but I got to tell you, I don't remember it exactly that I can quote it from the video, but I'll go back and give it a double check. He might as well have said it for all the others. You notice he
That
came
was
out
it.
of the gate talking, using a guy for an example, and had to point out that he lived in the basement, right?
That's exactly right. And the interesting thing about this is that this has happened several times throughout history. There's been a growth of a bachelor movement, and then on the tail of that, in come guys like Wilcox and start shaming men into getting married. There's a guy who wrote a book, I forget his name now, but it was called The Age of the Bachelor, and it studies the history of bachelorhood in the USA. And in it, he shows at certain periods, a lot of men started refusing to marry, and the levels of bachelors went up. Male bondings increased as well. Men would get together in pool halls and live in big sort of public housing, motels or whatever you want to call them. And a lot of people really started to worry at those times. And there was one book I'm thinking of in particular. It's called, it was written by people like Brad Wilcox in, I think, the 1940s. And the book was called Why Are You Single? I've got it here in my hand, actually. And the byline is a remarkably frank and practical report on the emotional and physical anxieties of the unmarried adult. And that's right. And in this book, there's a collection of authors, maybe 20 different authors, and they're all painting the bachelor as this immature, hedonistic person who basically hasn't grown up. He's immature. That's the word they use. So what we're seeing with Brad Wilcox is sort of typical, and always comes on the heel of a rise in numbers of bachelors.
You know, it's funny the amount of projection in this. One, what type of description might we have for women who live in a culture where they have it all and they're still not happy and still want more from men? That would almost border on hedonistic and infantile in my book. But
Absolutely. Narcissistic comes to mind too.
Sure. Yeah. But, you know, it's interesting that you're holding a book from the 1940s on this topic of people becoming concerned with men deciding to embrace bachelorhood versus married life. What do you think were the motivating factors? Is that even mentioned in this book that you have at all? What was motivating men in the 1940s to move away from marriage and into bachelorhood?
I think pretty much the same things as what's motivating MGTOW today. MGTOW, I think they've got a brand new movement, but it's nothing of the sort.
Just ask Sandman. They invented it. They invented it 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, the Pope of bachelors. But then this has happened, several times. There's been collectives of bachelors that have formed, and they've said basically, no, we don't want to enter into this trap. They believed that there was a lot of the legal system was against them, even 100 years ago. That you can read about that from the bachelors themselves. You can read about it in Ernest Belfort Baxter's writings. He wrote a book called, what was it? The Legal Subjection of Men. And in that, he has about, I think, 10 or 15 pages talking about what he calls the matrimonial privileges of women. I think that's the title. And in that, he lays out all the laws that are benefit women through matrimony, and the same laws that are discriminate against men or put men in a vulnerable position in one way or another. So this is what the bachelor movements of 100 years ago were reacting to, the same problems as today.
So in essence, it's the same thing that we've got going on today, only today we have the internet. We have a way for people to retaliate against that shaming response and shuck it off and coalesce again together. So I wonder, that would seem to me to be a pretty powerful and ominous sign for the Brad Wilcoxes of the world who want to shame young men into marriage because now they can get together, even if it's just on the internet, say, what? Screw you.
Yeah, that's a really important point, isn't it? It's, back in the day, with these books that I've just been referring to, there was no internet, and the presses, the printing presses and the newspaper presses were owned by governments or by tycoons who were sort of in the pockets of governments, and they controlled the message. Bachelors couldn't get any subversive information about why marriage was bad, and they couldn't tap into a community of men that felt the same. So it was much more difficult. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And I think we can use PragerU and Brad Wilcox as an example. Just look, I mean, they got 500,000 hits to that video from PragerU, more than that, probably pushing 600,000 about right now. It got downvoted into oblivion, destroyed in the comments, and then at least a half dozen response videos have flared up, and several other articles. Even Robert Franklin of the National Parents Organization wrote an article challenging Wilcox on this sort of distorted shaming worldview.
Right. So that was a good letter by Robert as well, and he pointed out some of the benefits of being in a relationship, and agreed with Brad on a few points, but then went into point out some of the problems with what Brad was doing. So, and that.
Oh yeah, I agree with that too. There are advantages to being in relationships. I mean, I've been in one for 14 years. I like it that way, but sort of like I've said the whole time I've been at this, who am I to tell anybody else how to live? It's not my place in life to say that, but it is, I think, my place to point logically to the pitfalls that are now inherent in relationships, and by the looks of things, always have been.
Yeah, there's an area, a little bit of confusion for me in Australia. If you're not married in Australia, they call that a de facto relationship, and I believe that term doesn't apply in other countries necessarily.
Correct.
And what that means, a de facto relationship is it's viewed by the government as basically identical to marriage. So what happens, for instance, if a man has children with a woman, he's not married, he says, no way am I ever going to get married. If she says, okay, I don't like you anymore, leave the house, I'm keeping the kids, he still has to pay alimony or some sort of maintenance. If he's rich, he has to pay child support. He gets the government chasing after him if he fails to pay. And basically the same problems as if he's married. So for me, it's always been a little bit confusing that people go after marriage as the problem, when here in Australia, it's all relationships that are the problem, at least from a legal standpoint. So
I think that's very important to point that out.
So is that the situation in the US, or that unmarried men are subject to the same laws? No,
it's very different. Well, they can get you for child support if you either agree that you have fathered a child or if you've actually fathered one. I mean, you get into paternity issues, it's very different. And also, laws in the United States vary from state to state. Where I live in Texas, I have lived in the same residence with the same woman for 14 years, but we are not in any way legally married, and can't be charged as legally married. You have to, in Texas, you have to represent yourself as husband and wife in as much as like sharing a bank account, and you actually have to go down to the court authorities and register as a couple. That's not a marriage, but you have to register legally as a couple. That makes you what Australia would call de facto married. But unless you do that, you're not. Now, two things. One, you always have to go in the United States by state law. Because they will prevail. So it really pays to understand the local laws where you live, to the state that you live. The other thing is that it's no different than Australia in one respect. You better treat your sperm like it was gold. you better protect it and not accidentally impregnate somebody. I mean, if you intend to get pregnant, that's one thing. But if you're not wanting to be a father, you have to be the one to make sure that doesn't happen, because once she's pregnant, it is totally and completely out of your hands. You might as well be married at that point.
Okay, that's what I was wondering about, whether the same dangers apply to the non-married men in the US. Does that also apply to division of assets upon separation? I'm thinking again still of a couple who are not married.
No. And again, it depends on where you are. But for instance, if I broke up with my partner today, I would be entitled to everything I brought into the relationship. I would probably be entitled, and so would she, by the way, it works both ways, to half of the worth of what we've accumulated since living together. But there wouldn't be any kind of default judgments that go to either party in that matter. If you wanted to fight about, trinkets in the house, you could do that. But it does not get treated like a marriage. It would be more like just a civil dispute about ownership of property going into it. But for instance, my car and all properties that are in my name won't be up for grabs by anybody. I will walk out of the relationship with those, guaranteed, no matter what happens, unless there's children involved.
Right.
Then it's a different story.
And do you think that the situation you described there would be different if you were married?
Oh, absolutely. It would be different. Everything would be on the table. The only exceptions to what does not become community property in Texas, for instance, is something that you, like land, real estate that you owned prior to the relationship outright. And that means it had it completely paid for. If you brought a mortgage into a marriage, that's going to become her property, or at least her shared property. Or if you get inheritance, a family member passes away or something and you inherit money, nobody can touch that. And I think the final exception is that if you are the beneficiary of a lawsuit, if you sue somebody and you win the lawsuit, the proceeds from that are still yours. But anything else that's acquired by you under state law is considered to be acquired by the couple. Therefore, that makes community property.
That makes a lot of sense. I've been confused as to why a lot of MGTOW makes such a big deal about being anti-marriage when, like I said, here in Australia, all the same sort of rule or legal problems apply. So the point is moot here in Australia, and I believe
it's moot here too. The point, really, I mean, the whole idea that I've heard some MGTOW, and I'm not talking about all of them. I mean, goodness knows, we've got me, you, we've got other MGTOWs on staff at ABFM. I've talked to lots of other MGTOWs that aren't of the extreme variety. So I just want to be clear that we're talking about a couple of outliers out there.
Absolutely.
And some of their 14-year-old followers that seem to think, I mean, it's sort of like there's some MRAs that think the whole battle for men's rights is a battle against feminism, which if you watch that video by Brad Wilcox, you've got to know you're full of shit to think that. There's some MGTOW that think the whole defining deal is marriage. And the reason they're saying that is because marriage puts you at legal risk of a woman abusing the laws. Man, you're at legal risk anytime you're in the same room alone with a woman. In both,
that's the point. That's the take home for sure.
So it's not only erroneous and deceptive, but it's foolhardy to put all your eggs in the marriage basket and say that feel like that I'm free and clear and immune as long as I don't get married. That's certainly part of it, I think, especially in a lot of places where the marriage laws are so totally stacked in the wrong way. But that's one part of the equation. And to ignore that, or to be blind to the other dangers, or to not live a fully conscious lifestyle because you're thinking, as long as I don't get married, I'm safe. Well, we'll see you later when your life is in ruins.
Yeah, that's right. So the trick, which you pointed out in a few of your articles, is to very carefully assess any woman you're thinking of entering into a relationship with, whether married or whether you intend to marry or not marry, because in both cases you can get into deep shit. So move cautiously.
And I think that the real bottom line of all of this is the way you start it, because that's a critical point. I mean, men, other than sexually, for the most part, men don't assess. They don't. They decide they're attracted to a woman, and that's all they need to know. And then they get into infatuation and romantic chivalry, and suddenly she can do no wrong. She's the most wonderfulest woman that's ever walked the face of the planet, and by God, I'll strike down any man that says otherwise. You can't reason with a guy like that. A guy like that is painting a target on his back, and there's nothing you can do to stop him, in my experience. But what is really important, the takeaway of this, is to understand that you've got an obligation to assess all women, no matter what your level of interaction with them, to be cautious. But that if you are cautious, if you do know what you're doing, that is a lot better way to minimize risk than avoiding anything, including marriage. One of the ways that you can do risk reduction on marriage is not to follow the advice of idiots like Brad Wilcox, who is basically saying, get married so you don't feel ashamed of yourself. What an ignorant reason to get married.
Yeah, unbelievable. The other thing that stood out with him, which most people seem to pick up, was he kept emphasizing how much money people would make.
Yeah, like they're going to have it for themselves.
Yeah, it was the blindness in that line was incredible. He pointed out you would feel you would move up. You'd be more determined to get a career, to chase a career. You'd be more determined to get raises in your position at work, and you'd earn more money. But yeah, it all goes to someone else, doesn't it?
And I'll use myself as a shameful example of that, Peter. When I was married before, which, knock on wood, will never happen to me again. And I don't really have to knock on wood because I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen. But when I was married, just a few months before our separation and divorce, I got out of the shower and went to change clothes and went into my closet. And I noticed, and it was almost like I'd been living in a trance, right? Because I had never noticed that I had about 8 or 10% of the closet space in that bedroom. And the rest, all throughout the house, was dominated by her things. And everywhere I turned, it was her. And I was in this little corner, this little spot where my meagerly clothes collection was allowed to exist.
And that's supposed to be better than Mum's basement.
Yes, and that's a step up from Mom's basement. God, it's like you have to wonder. And the thing is, I know that Brad Wilcox is not an idiot. I know that he's a professor of sociology, which obviously doesn't prove he's a genius, but he's clearly not an idiot. It just boggles my mind how somebody can write that script. Think about it as thoughtfully as you have to do to write a script for a video like that, because it was well written. I'm not saying the content was good, but it was well written. It was well formulated, well constructed, put together in a slick video presentation. How he could have managed to do that without having a what the fuck moment.
Yeah, it sort of stinks of hypocrisy, the whole thing, doesn't it? I'm sure he had those moments, but he's obviously put them out of his mind. But one of the things that he did touch on, I think is worth covering, is what he calls the benefits of marriage. I'd reframe that as the benefits of relationships. So there's a problem straight away with the way he frames that. But there are benefits to relationships. We are pair bonding, but we are a pair bonding species. We enjoy companionship with a woman. There's the intimacy, there's the labor sharing, there's a whole lot of.
And you notice how he didn't mention any of that one time. He didn't talk about companionship. He didn't talk about intimacy. He didn't talk about any of that. All he talked about was how hard you could work.
Right, that's right. Improve yourself and stop being a Peter Pan. That was it.
Yeah. Ugh. Oh, man, I should actually, I think I need to start bringing a barf bucket to our conversations, Peter.
Those benefits are, well, what were the other benefits he named? Were there any?
You could work hard and make more money, and you could also really work hard and make more money.
Okay, so no benefits, in other words, but if you follow his perspective.
No, I mean, actually, the stuff that I get out of my relationship which is companionship, shared interests, doing things together, sharing struggles in life. It's nice if you encounter illness or some kind of hardship or death in the family, that you've got that other person there to help you walk through that stuff so that you're not doing it alone. Those are the things that I value from my relationship. And,
absolutely. Yeah.
And my relationship also affords me the freedom to do what you and I are doing here.
Right.
Which, I mean, if he's suggesting that men should trade that in for a yoke and a time card, he's got to be, there has to be some drug use involved there.
You'd think so. I'm thinking of the.
Go ahead.
I'm thinking of the labour sharing between couples now as you're talking. I did a trade as a blacksmith earlier in my life, and I had 2 assistants that would work with me. And instead of getting 3 times the amount of work done, I got 10 times the amount of work done with those assistants.
Yes.
So the same applies, I think, to a couple. Not they don't have to be married, but just a couple living together. You do become much more productive. You can get a lot more done. Your household, the running of your household becomes more efficient. So there's that side of things that I think is valid. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, a lot of little stuff like that in life. I mean, just wasn't too long ago, we both took our cars to have the oil changed and ran some errands. But we got a ton of stuff done, and the time passed like nothing was happening. And, call me a fool, but I rather enjoy that. I'm doing it low risk. So it is not avoiding relationships. That's not what Peter and I are talking about here. We're not even necessarily talking about avoiding marriage, although I'm still holding to my guns and saying, just there's no need. You don't have to get married to have a relationship. But I'm still, sometimes people think that this is all about being anti-woman and anti-relationship, and nothing could be further from the truth. I think that once you get yourself invested in understanding this philosophy and understanding to think about it, how the thinking goes into it, you can actually have better relationships by far than you ever could before.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And with that, I think we've reached our little time limit here for the day, Peter. Do you have anything that you want to add before we hit the
No,
dirt?
I think that's enough for today. The one thing I'll be interested to watch how Brad Wilcox responds to the fallout over the video and the few articles he's been presenting. Obviously, people have given him a lot to think about, and I'm not going to hold my breath, but I'll just be watching to see if he does bring out a modified version, of what he's been saying.
I wouldn't hold my breath, but I'll be watching with you. I share the same interest in seeing what his reaction is, but I'm indeed not holding my breath. Well, folks, that's going to be about it for today. I want to remind everybody, these talks come to you 30 days early if you're a Patreon subscriber. And one of the things you also might benefit from is that Peter Wright's book, Gynocentrism, From Feudalism to the Modern Fairy Disney Princess. Excuse me, I knew I couldn't get that whole title out without screwing it up. One more time, Gynocentrism, From Feudalism to the Modern Disney Princess. A great book, and it has been recently revised. is available for free download to Patreon subscribers. And again, no minimum amount on that. Come in there and pledge $1 per video, cap it at $1. We don't care. You get the book. These talks are available to people who pledge $5 per video, and we will be bringing them as regularly as we can. We can't guarantee a certain schedule of them, but we can tell you we will be doing them and bringing them to you on the Air for Men Patreon. With that, I want to wish everybody a great day. And Peter, as always, much pleasure talking with you.
Likewise.